Step through the grand doors and welcome to Berlin's most luxurious destination, Grand Hotel, a place where the rich, the desperate, the powerful, and the doomed all collide under one lavish roof. This 1932 classic isn't just a movie, it's an event, with an all-star cast featuring Greta Garbo, John Barrymore, Joan Crawford, and many more. Grand Hotel defined the ensemble drama before Hollywood even had a name for it. Love, betrayal, ambition, and scandal swirl through the hotel's gilded halls, proving that while the guests may change, the drama never checks out. So as the famous line goes, people come, people go, but nothing ever happens. Or does it? Welcome to Grand Hotel.
I was ambitious then. We were drilled like little soldiers. No rest, no stopping. I was little, slim, but hard as a diamond. And I became famous and... But why am I telling you all this? Last night I didn't know you at all.
There's a Grand Hotel everywhere you go in the world. Will and I sat down and watched just that. We watched 1932's version of Grand Hotel. Release date, April 12th, 1932. Tagline, a group of very different individuals staying at a luxurious hotel in Berlin deal with each other in their respective dramas, Will. Directed by Edward Goulding, distributed by Lowe's. That's Loews. Has nothing to do with the Lowe's department store. Runtime an hour and 52 minutes. And the cast here is worth mentioning, Will, because this is sort of a first of its kind. This is one of the big first ensemble casts where we had a lot of Hollywood big names, and it really made the audiences kind of flood to the theaters because the box office was the fifth best box office of the year. So let's go over some of these names real quick, and then we'll get your take. Greta Garbo, John Barrymore, Joan Crawford, Wallace Beery, Lionel Barrymore, and Louis Stone. So, Will, with this ensemble cast, everything that you've seen, before we get into your initial thoughts on Grand Hotel, the movie, just tell me where you're at when you see a movie coming out and it has an ensemble cast of characters of well-known, whether it be A-list or just big respected names in the field of acting. Does it add to your excitement, or have you seen enough, maybe not say flops, but enough where there's not enough love to go around or enough time to go around to really flesh out these characters? Where are you at with ensemble cast, Will?
Yeah, no, and it's always fun to kind of see like, oh man, those guys are working together again, or like for instance, Wolves right now is out, and I haven't watched it yet, but Brad Pitt and George Clooney are back at it together, so that's something I definitely have on my radar. But like when you see a movie come out and it's got a bunch of people in it, it definitely makes you excited to kind of see how all the pieces are going to work and fit together, and it doesn't always pay off, right? Because sometimes it's too many mouths to feed, right? Where someone has too much screen time or doesn't have enough, and you get a little worried about that kind of stuff going in. But here, with the ensemble here, I think everything kind of fit together really nicely. So it was kind of cool seeing all these names that we've seen before and some of the bigger ones we haven't quite yet kind of work together. So
yeah, and I don't know about you, but when I think of ensemble cast, I think maybe the most, or maybe it's just the one that's coming to my head right now, but maybe the most famous one is something like Ocean's 11, right? When you get like these Rat Pack type guys that come in, you got Clooney and Pitt, and they must have been on top of your head too because you mentioned Wolves. Yep. But like then you get Damon in there, and you get Reiner, and you get all these names of these Hollywood A-list legends. And they're sharing screen time. And then if it works or fails, in this case, that worked. So you end up getting a sequel and then another sequel where you added even more big names, and you got Andy Garcia, and you get, Julia Roberts, and you just get these big names that come along for the ride because it's so much fun. And then, that's like people that are major players in the game. Then you get like ensemble casts, and then you end up getting cameos if they're done right? In these sequels. Sure. So I think of like The Hangover, and how you can't necessarily say that The Hangover Part 3 is like an ensemble cast, but maybe by that time it was, because they all blew up at that the different time. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah, and it's also fun to kind of go back, like if you go back like 10 years or so and you kind of look at a young cast of characters. Like Euphoria is kind of going through this right now, the TV show Euphoria, where you've got all these actors who are kind of up and
Yeah.
coming, who are starting to find their footing and, make their own space, and kind of going back and looking at a cast like that. It wasn't necessarily like a big deal ensemble at the time, but going back and watching something can sometimes be fun because you're like, oh man, that person's in it, or it can be fun to go back to and look at those kind of casts.
Yeah, dude, you said that, and that's so spot on because that is where they're at, because they're having an issue trying to have all these guys come back and, record or, the show that kind of got them there. You know what I mean? You know what I always thought was incredible? Have you ever heard of the TV show back in the 90s? It was 1999. It was on for one season. It was called Freaks and Geeks.
Yep.
Dude, this is the cast from Freaks and Geeks that got canceled after one go around. Linda Cardellini, you know her. She's from a lot of movies. She's not necessarily an A-lister, but she's well known.
Grandma's Boy.
Grandma's Boy. Yep, absolutely. John Francis Daly, he's had some roles, but like Martin Starr, Busy Phillips, Jason Segel, James Franco, Seth Rogen, Sarah Hagen. I mean, these are big names that have been around for 20, 30 years. And it's just kind of funny that the show that they were all on together didn't make it. So,
right. No, hilarious.
Let's get to Grand Hotel, Will. This was a lengthy film for coming off of some of the shorter films that we've watched. It feels like we've watched some shorter films as of recent. So, when you watch an hour and 10-minute movies or an hour and a half minute movie or hour and a half movies, then you get to a 2-hour film, it better pack a punch, right? It better be good. Where were you at with Grand Hotel? Give me your initial reactions.
Yeah, so I really liked this movie. The 2-hour runtime didn't really feel like 2 hours because I think everything was kind of paced really well, and there was enough compelling storylines going on to kind of make everything not feel like it was dragging on, or even sometimes feeling a little rushed because you want the characters to kind of maybe be fleshed out a little bit more, where you can kind of understand the characters' motivations or where they're coming from a little bit better. So the almost 2 hour runtime really didn't bother me too much. With something like this, if it had been any shorter, I don't think it could have worked because you needed that much time to kind of understand exactly what was going on and some of the themes that maybe weren't really thought out super well. They wouldn't have made any sense if the movie had been any shorter. So if you had to name one thing, what was the one thing that made you gravitate towards really enjoying this film? You said it didn't drag to you. You thought everything kind of had a good pacing to it. What stood out the most to you? Was it the narratives was it the drama and the storylines in which they laid out? Was it the acting performances? Was it the director's choices? Like, what was the one thing, if you had to put your hand on, why you would make a case for this movie being one of the best of 1932? Well, clearly the acting stood out here because I thought everyone was just really, really good and even bordering on phenomenal. We haven't seen John Barrymore before, but he was just so good in this. The individual stories of these characters didn't always work perfectly, and the way they kind of meshed up sometimes wasn't perfect, but their stories and seeing where they were going, I thought was really working. Like even if the way they butted up against each other wasn't perfect, the individual characters were compelling. So that's really what kept me drawn to the film. Was not necessarily seeing where everything was going, but just kind of understanding those characters a little bit better.
Yeah, so I'm with you on the characters for sure. I really enjoyed. I thought the characters were not only were they fleshed out, there was a clear difference between each character and maybe their place in society and where they started versus where they end the movie at. I found myself, I didn't have the same necessary reaction as you. I did find myself kind of looking at the clock a little bit. I felt like I wanted maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit more maybe not drama, maybe a little more drama, maybe a little more melodrama, maybe for my taste. I'll give you an example, like the movie Crash. When you think about stories that kind of interweave and they kind of come on top of each other, I really enjoy that movie. Now, I know that movie kind of gets a slap sometimes because of how much they did that, how much layering they did, and how perfect everybody's stories kind of played into each other. I really enjoy it when they kind of pull that off a little bit more. Here, it felt like instead of storylines kind of interweaving, it felt like storylines kind of parallel to a certain degree. So maybe I didn't love the movie. I definitely liked the movie. I was very enamored with a lot of the performances, but I gotta say I didn't love Greta Garbo. I did not love Greta Garbo. Maybe it's just because her character is the least relatable character for me. Maybe it's some of the dialogue that they chose to use. You use the word wooden quite a bit sometimes. I found her performances of all of them to be the most wooden, where John Barrymore, I really found him to be like a presence is a word I use quite a bit, but I felt like him, and he stole scenes that he was in. Even though he was towered over by General Director Praising's character, Wallace Beery, he kind of still, he's in the scene and he feels big in every scene he's in. So I'm with you on John Barrymore being somebody that kind of stood out for me. The movie itself, what I think I liked more about what the conversations that the movie kind of engages you in, that you can have with your friends, kind of like what we'll have on this podcast. I like how the movie does that, maybe a little bit more than the actual movie itself.
Yeah, no, and kind of to touch on Greta Garbo's character, I think the biggest flaw with the character is it is the character that we get the least of, right? She's kind of in the first act, she's more of a she's not really, she's on the periphery. Like the only thing that matters about her is the pearls, right? And it's not until John actually meets her and starts having a conversation with her in the hotel room where we get a little bit more of her. And I do think that's one of the weaker parts of the movie, because there's something there, right? Because she's essentially depressed, right? Like she's a depressed character who's kind of up against, something, but it's not necessarily explained well enough, because, I think she's got like she's going through an existential crisis, right? Like she is simultaneously kind of getting pushed out because she's aging, but also like she's getting pushed out because she's not caring about it as much. So her performances are dwindling. So there's this undercurrent of her butting up against her career that's never really discussed or explained, or she doesn't have a monologue where she gets to explain exactly what's going on. So I thought that character was the weakest for sure. I don't know if it was her performance or not. There were some moments, right, where she makes the phone call and she's on the phone and it's kind of like, it's supposed to be in love. That doesn't quite work, but yeah.
Then these as they do in these movies, they do it today too, but they definitely did it back then. These characters fall in love with each other so quickly, and they're ready to uproot their entire lives for this. You would think someone like a group. I'm gonna mess this up completely, but like a Gruzinskaya.
Gruzinskaya, I think is how they were saying it.
We're gonna refer to Greta Garbo here, ladies and gentlemen. With Greta Garbo's character, we don't get a lot of that backstory like you alluded to, but, I just kind of felt like with her character, she seemingly, you would think with someone like her, Will, she spent her entire life getting to the place and point in which she's at, right? And then someone like a Baron von, comes in and he's willing to uproot her life and she's willing to do it right away. But I guess she's not necessarily uprooting her life, right? She's just kind of been re-inspired because she's this missing piece in her life. So I don't necessarily give it, necessarily down the movie before that or because of that. I just think that I'd like to maybe know a little bit more about what she's going through. But I did do some research here, Will, and I kind of want to read and see what you think of the way other people have characterized our main 5 characters here, to see if you think that what they're symbolized their kind of their struggles and strengths in society. So the Baron character, played by John Barrymore, represents the fading aristocracy clinging to charm despite being financially ruined. So kind of breaking down his character a little bit, I do agree with this because in the movie, he seems that he's obviously charming. Right away, Joan Crawford's character, you know, whether she falls in love, she seems a little bit more, you know, less able to fall in love that quickly. But she is enamored by the man. She does seem to, you know, want to be around him because of his charm, Greta Garbo, because, I mean, he was robbing Greta Garbo, right? And because of his charm, he's able to save that moment, and maybe the greatest save in history. You know, he saves that moment and gets this woman to fall in love with him. And even so much so, when we get the Kringline's character, he has an opportunity to rob him, even though Kringline is so willing to give him his money, and he just can't do it. So he is, for all his faults, he is an honest man. He's just going through this financial ruin. So do you kind of that assessment of him you agree with?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, it's very British, right? Because
Yeah,
there's a separation between like American history and British history where you have like a different there's class in both, societies, but British is very defined, like a class struggle, and it has a lot to do with it has almost nothing to do with the generation before. It's
sure.
several generations before, right? So
Yep.
there's something there that's British that I don't quite have access to, but I think it's right.
Going off of Greta Garbo, she is supposed to be embodying the isolation and the vulnerability that comes with fame. I think there's a little bit more layers to her character than just that sentence, but
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily I feel that she was struggling with fame, no, so to speak. But I
Yeah.
definitely felt the vulnerability and the isolation part coming through. So, praising a ruthless businessman representing capitalist greed and the pressures of continuing to be in power, right? Kringeline, a working class man eager to experience luxury before death, symbolizing the desire for dignity and happiness regardless of class. And then we get Joan Crawford's character, who represents the struggles of the working woman, but using charm and wit to navigate a male-dominated world. Do you take issue with any of those categorizations of those characters?
No, I don't think so. The only thing is, I think we've got to add a little bit to Greta Garbo's character because it's not just fame, right? I think that's a big piece of the puzzle, but an equally big piece is this idea of getting to a place of success and it being underwhelming, right?
Yeah,
Like you can be successful in life at the thing you choose to do, and we've probably talked about this 1,000 times off camera, but like what is the end of the pursuit of happiness, right? Or is it always a pursuit? Like is there actually a goal that we can get to where we're happy? And I think that's what she's struggling with here. She's a successful dancer, and well liked, famous, and yet she's still butting up against this thing she can't quite get to with her happiness. So
you know, one thing I don't want to overlook, kind of going off what you just said, is like I think they do a really fantastic job in this movie, and maybe it's just a domino effect of people. And I mentioned this before on the show when I talk about just someone else acknowledging your existence, right? Knowing you exist, like how the domino effect on every other aspect of your life that can have, right? You might compound things if you're not where you want to be personally or professionally or whatever, right? If you might have a family and feel on top of the world in your or personal life, but if you're not where you want to be professionally, that can impact your personal life and your view, or at least your perspective on it, right? I thought this movie did a really good job of like showcasing just the importance, like with Kringeline's character, right? He needs somebody. He needs to start living, but he also needs other people to participate in his living for him to feel like he's living, right? Garbo needs that participation from Barrymore's character to feel and reignite all these pursuits that she had in her life. So I think, going off what you're saying, I think there might be an ebb and flow to our pursuit of happiness based on what our size of community is at that time too.
yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And everybody's just a little bit different, right? Because some people need a bigger community, some people don't need quite a big a community. But the point is, we need a community. So whatever that is, if it's not well defined and it's not achieved, then it can bring you down. That's for sure.
For sure, for sure. You mentioned something earlier too, and we'll get into some of the anecdotes here, Will. Greta Garbo's filming schedule. So we mentioned that she didn't have a lot of on-screen time compared to maybe the majority of the cast here. And this could be why. So it sounds like, Will, we were dealing with a little bit of a prima donna. There was clear tensions between Joan Crawford and Garbo's in real life. And a lot of the reasons could have to do with this. So Greta Garbo, already an enigmatic and famously private star. So I believe she was somebody who really liked her privacy. She insisted on filming her scenes separately from the rest of the cast. She was extremely selective about when she worked, which led to her schedule being arranged in such a way that she never appeared on set with her fellow actors. Even though their characters interacted in the film, Greta Garbo's preference was for privacy, and because of that privacy, it added to her mysterious image, furthering emphasizing her character. I'm not going to say her name, but basically her famous line where she says, "I just want to be alone. I want to be alone," became this infamous line. And apparently I overlooked it, Will, but that "I want to be alone" was so infamous that it landed number 30 on AFI's top 100 most infamous quotes in movie history. So I didn't pick up on that line being that, but maybe because of her schedule, her desire for privacy, Will, maybe we get a lot. She's just not in a lot of scenes because of the way the movie's trying to tell a story with everybody interacting.
Right. And she's not in many more films, right? I mean, she really only worked for, if I remember correctly, don't have her work history pulled up right in front of me, but I mean, it was only about 10 to 15 years where she was actually doing films, I think. So it's not long after this where she, she lives for another 40 years, but she only does another handful of movies in the 30s.
That's interesting. I did not know that. Yeah, you're right. After this movie, she goes on to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 more movies. But you would think someone of her youth at the time, and the medium and how it's getting ready to kind of explode and take off. You'd think that you would be someone that would be around much longer than, looks like 1941 is when her career stopped. I don't know when let's see when she passed, just out of curiosity. Greta Garbo, she lived until April 15th of 1990. So you're right. This is someone who did not necessarily like all the glitz and glamour that came with Hollywood. Interesting note, Will. That's important to note. We move on. Other anecdotes. I mentioned Joan Crawford and Garbo had tension, a lot of because of the way she liked her privacy. I think Crawford took it as maybe a little standoffish, and because Crawford never really got to interact with Garbo when they were on set together, because Garbo never really allowed that to happen. So, what of all the themes in this movie, which one stands out the most of what the director's trying to state? It's got to be more than just lives interact and interconnect when you come to a hotel, right? So what is the main message you think they've taken away from here?
Well, there's the most sympathetic character really ends up being Baron, right? John Barrymore's character, because he's the one that dies in the end. Spoiler alert. He's the one that gets crashed over the head with a telephone. So I think a theme here really is like compassion versus like unrelenting, desire, right? Like having compassion for others and recognizing that you can't just do every single thing that you want. I think that's a pretty big theme here, because the two characters that end up squaring off in the hotel room there are, the two characters that one's very compassionate towards the people who are lower than him, and the other one's not. He doesn't care about, Lionel Barrymore's character at all. And the only reason he cares about Joan Crawford's character is because he wants to, seduce her. So I think there's definitely a theme there of like, hey, like just because you're rich and powerful, and are in an upper class doesn't mean that you can't be compassionate towards others. So I think that's a pretty big theme here.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think you're right. Did you? Where were you at with the general director Pricing's character? Like, where did that fall? Where did that fall for you? Were you? Did I mean? Because he clearly shows his face a lot. Like he shows his intentions. He knows,
Yeah.
he's trying to persuade, um, Joan Crawford's character. You know what? I'm gonna stop real quick because I want to ask you this question. I watched this
Sure.
documentary on Vince McMahon. And anybody who knows me, I'm a diehard wrestling fan. Okay, it is my favorite thing in the world. I've made no qualms about it forever. It's just storytelling to me at its best. Now, it's sometimes most ridiculous, but that's a different thing. Anyways, there was a sentence given by Triple H in the documentary because they were kind of going over some of the storylines in the 90s, late 90s that they were telling about how ridiculous the show was pushing the envelope, trying to capture an audience and compete with WCW. So without going too far down this road, basically though, what's happening in this documentary at this particular time is that they are questioning the morals of WWE, particularly Vince McMahon, because he is the head writer. But, there was a lot of people that would pitch these ideas. And then you also have the players who would go out and perform these ideas, right? So what ends up happening is at whose fault, right? So Triple H makes this qualm about like, okay, yes, we were doing some morally, questionable things, right? Trying to capture an audience. But if the audience is receiving it, liking it, and then growing insurmountably because of these things, who's at fault? Right. And I'm kind of coming back to here with Pricing and Joan Crawford's character, right? Because we clearly on screen, we kind of gravitate towards Joan Crawford and we like her character a lot more. She's empathetic. She's in a bad place as being a female in this society. She's trying to, work her way up. The other guy has all the power, has all the opportunity, has the place where he could be kind. He's not. But at the end, they still find themselves in the same room together for different reasons, but they're both still there. So in a long-winded way, Will, where are we at with characters that one is clearly not moral, the other one we think is, but yet they still find themselves in the same room? Where are we at with that? Because Triple H said, who's at fault? Is it the people that create this or the tens of thousands of people who hoot and holler for it every week? Who's more to blame? He doesn't take a stance. He goes, I don't know. So where are you at with that?
Yeah, there's a really important line that I'm gonna butcher Kringeline kind of speaks when he's super drunk, right? During the gambling scene. And he says, I'm the master. For the first time in my life, I'm my own master, right?
Yep.
And I think that's really important to the question that you're asking because Praising is his own master, right? I mean, clearly he's got some things that are up in the air and he might not be able to be his own master. So he's trying to sort that out in his business life. But when you're your own master, you get to impose your will on others. So when you aren't your own master, and in this instance, Joan Crawford's character, Flemschen, right? She by the nature of her social position, she is backed into a corner in every scenario she gets put into with a man because she only has one way forward, right? And that's survival. So here, it's important that she's in this room, yes, because it's going to bring her up, but she's also, she has her back against the wall because it's the only option she has. So she's trying to navigate this world that she's clearly in a lesser position than Praising, and I don't, maybe moral's not the right framework for this. It's more like is Praising moral? Probably not. Is she? I don't know if she has that option, right? I don't know if that's an option she has available to her to question whether or not she's moral. She's just trying to act, and I think that's the important part here.
So can we kind of unravel that just a little bit more? Just because I'm curious, because
Yeah.
I like kind of the dissecting this a little bit. So we do say, so you had mentioned Crawford's character, like what option does she have? So I'm just to push back, just to play the opposite, just for the audience here, right? If she was to refute his dictation, as he puts it, right? I have a dictation I need done. If she was to refute that, clearly she has that choice. There's no moment in this movie where praising, for lack of better words, gets rapey or gets puts his hands and takes control in a physical way, right? So I guess here's my question then: is like, if she was to refute that, it has to go back to whatever style life she has, even though it might come from poverty and poor, more poor ways. Does she still, I mean, can we argue that she really doesn't have a choice, or does she still have a choice to live life that way and just find whatever joy she can in that without selling herself? Look, I'm not taking a stance here. I'm asking the question just to unfold it, just to see, because it sounds like you were saying that she doesn't have a choice, or she might not have a choice, but I'm saying if she does have a choice, even though the alternative is way less desirable, and she still finds herself in that room with him, is there a moral? That's where I'm asking, just because, yes, on the top surface, she really, I think there's still a choice. I think she still has a choice, but there is like, I'm tired of living this way, and this is just the one circumstance that we've seen. I'm sure she's been in 100 circumstances this way. So then you can argue, does she really have a choice? I get it. So I guess wanted to unfold this with you, I guess.
Yeah, no. So I think you're right that she's there because she made a choice to be there, right? But the question is, the question that that gets posed here is, she needs to choose between, when you are in a lower class, access to wealth and access to moving up class is it's not just limited, it's almost impossible, right? Like we hear these stories all the time about like the people who overcame the odds, and I fucking hate it, right? Because it's still a lottery, right? We're not like, it's still a lottery to overcome those odds. And it's still, you're still in a position where the only way to make your way through is to make hard choices that often put yourself at risk. And here, for Joan Crawford's character, it's a risk of having to literally probably get on her knees, right, to service her boss. So there's, whether or not there's a choice, I think you're probably right. There is a choice not to go into that room, but what kind of choice is it if it's between poverty and the only way to go up, right? And yes, it's a choice, but it's a real shitty one. And I think a lot of people have to choose the hard one because it's the only choice available to them. So I think that's kind of what I'm getting at here.
Yeah. No, I always like kind of dissecting these things a little bit more. Just go a little bit further.
Yeah.
And I appreciate your willingness to try to answer those questions and take a stand. Because I have thoughts on it too as well, but without going too much further, going off of what you said when it comes to that rags the richest story, like that kind of how that kind of sits in your craw a little bit. It doesn't bother me as much because that's the American dream, right? Is this overcoming the impossible odds. It doesn't necessarily sit in my craw. I do. What bothers me is when people downplay. Maybe they're downplay the things in which their privileges that maybe positioned them to overcome things a little bit easier. And then, I guess for those that maybe stand out and speak out so much about like how they overcame, I get why they'd have that perspective because they worked so hard and they overcame these obstacles. So I get their perspective. I guess it's when people that necessarily didn't have to overcome those obstacles speak on these matters and downplay like the privileges in which they were born into, that made their lives 10 times easier than anybody that has to overcome those. So, just an interesting conversation, man. Interesting conversation. Glad we had it. Anything else on that before we move on to the scenes?
Uh, no. I, I, I want to say something, but I don't know if I should. People, people work hard every day and die in a coal mine, right? Like
Yep.
I appreciate hard work. I've worked pretty hard in my life too, and I'm in a good place. So I try not to overlook that, but at the same time, like that, there's some luck involved there, right? And I just think that that's the thing we overlook when we have these conversations, is that sometimes it also is a roll of the dice.
100%. Jim Carrey in his graduation speech, which if you guys have ever had, if you have 25 minutes, listen to it. It is, I go back to it once a year. I love it. I'm obsessed with some of the quotes he has in there, but he says that his father, he believed, was the funniest man that he ever knew. And he said he worked a job his entire life for other people that he hated and failed at that job because mainly he bought in this idea of having to provide for his family and all the reasons why you do that. But he says if you're going to do something your entire life and ultimately still fail at the thing that you hate doing, you might as well take a chance on doing something you love, and hoping that you win the lottery. And I like that perspective too. So,
Yeah.
Will, this movie got a 3.5 on Letterboxd and 87% on Rotten Tomatoes. Where your thoughts fall on this without giving your score? I don't know why we hold your score until the end. You can just reveal your score now if you want. I just like to build the suspense of Will's score.
No, I kind of wrote jokingly in my notes here 4.25, right? Because I'm
Interesting.
somewhere in that range, because I like the characters enough here and I like what it's going for enough that I want to give it a 4.5. But there's a lot of things that just bugged me also about the way the story was told, and the way the characters don't ultimately fit together and the themes don't ultimately make a ton of sense, that kind of make me want to pull back the reins a bit towards that 4. So
Fair enough. I think if you are giving this more of a 4.25, this might be the furthest off we've been on a movie yet so far. So I'm going to stick at a 3.5 for me personally, which means I was fully entertained. It means it checked off all the boxes to be a good movie. It missed something. It missed a lot of things for me specifically to get it to that next level. But with that being said, I did enjoy the movie. I just don't think I liked it necessarily maybe as much as you did. But let's go into some of these scenes. Now, I wanted to try something a little different. So, Will, I'm admitting something here to the world. I take a lot of notes when we watch these things, right? I'm worried for when we get to Gone with the Wind, when we get to some of these movies that are 3 hours long, that I just think we're going to be on the show forever. And I have a hard time maybe choosing which scenes should be left out when we talk and which scenes don't, because if a movie's done right, every scene matters, right? And I think if we talk about every scene in great detail, we'll never have an entertaining podcast. So what I did was, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if we ever watch Birdman, we're just going to have to recite the whole movie.
Yeah, exactly. And we will get there. Because there was a transformation in film happening when that movie came out. So that's an interesting time period too. So kind of like what's happening right now too. Anyways, that was a kind of a rabbit hole there, but I went to ChatGPT and I typed in and I just prompted it. I said, list off the important scenes that help, progress the story of the movie Grand Hotel in ChatGPT. And this is what it gave me. So, we're going to have a much shorter scene list this week, and I'm not sure how I feel about it, but I want to know how you feel if this works better for you, because sometimes I can get a little long in the tooth on these things. So, scene 1, though, I do like to start off with the way a movie opens, and in this case, we get all these interchanging people talking on the phone. We get to hear Kringeline talking about how he's dying and he's ill, and he says a great line. I think he had some of the better quotes in this movie. He says a great line in the middle of the movie where he says, "It took death to make me, force me to live." So often that's the case here with us. It kind of gives us new perspective on what matters and what doesn't. We get introduced right away to Praising's character and kind of the challenges he's talking to his papa. So like his character at times kind of comes off as a likable character, which can kind of confuse the audience a little bit.
Sure.
And then we get it mixed in a couple other characters. We got the head porter who's got a baby on the way and he's waiting to hear from his wife and all the things that come from that and a few others as well. So how'd you like the opening shot and just kind of the setup of this ensemble of cast and characters that we're getting ready to run into?
Yeah, I loved it. I love the kind of semi-focus on the individual characters. Then you kind of shift to the next scene. It's kind of like, it's almost like a montage, but not quite, where you get a little bit of everybody, so you can kind of understand the flow of the movie, right? And how it's not going to sit back on anything. It's kind of going to make you push your way through the movie. So I thought it was really cool.
Yeah, I do too. And I even the arrivals at the hotel as they're all coming in and they kind of show the big shot of that hotel looked amazing, by the way, just amazing.
Oh yeah.
I love those big atrium areas, that kind of with all the rooms surrounding on each side. It was really kind of like a cruise ship, except way more massive. So after the first scene of that, we get the arrivals at the hotels. Various characters check in, each with their own secret motivations. This sets up the film's core dynamic of intersecting lives. This is basically where we get to meet the players. I want to ask you this question. Mr. Otto Kringlein. I feel for the guy. He's dying and he's wanting to live and he's looking for a lifeline, right? Somebody participate in this life with me so that I can, boy, did he not come off as like stage 5 clinger, annoying. Hey bro, give me some space. Like, where are you at with his character and the way they used him throughout the movie? Did you find him as it went on to be more annoying, less annoying, more endearing? Where were you at with him? Because he's a lot.
Some annoyance.
He's a lot.
Yeah. No, he's definitely a lot. There's some annoyance, right? Like, especially when he's trying to get everyone to hang around for the gambling a little bit more. But he's also like one of those guys where you can't, like, he's the guy that wants you to have one more drink at the bar. And it's hard to say no to him because you just know, like, what the hell am I going to get up to with this guy? So he's got a loving sensibility where you kind of want to see where it goes with him,
See, it maybe I think I think his character outside of his story, I found him to be so needy of a character, Will, that I had a hard time finding what was redeemable about him for even a great gentleman like Baron to stop what he's doing all the time. Because he even says it. He's like, you mean it? Every time I see you, you'll talk to me. And it's like, if like he was that way, but also was funny or had a joke or whatever, you know what I mean? It wasn't until the big kind of confrontation scene with him and Praling where I was like, okay, I like that he's had this big kind of monologue. He's going after him. He's standing up for himself. I started to appreciate his character a little bit more from that moment on. But up until that point, I really had a hard time with the fact that these guys would really give him as much time as they were.
Yeah, and you're probably right. Like, if I actually met this person in real life, I'd probably make some excuses for what I was doing Saturday night. But there's something. There are the type of people that like can just kind of get into your space, and it's invasive, but it doesn't feel gross. Like, it's almost like they just can't help themselves. They got to put their arm around you, and sometimes that's off-putting, but other times it can be kind of endearing.
It can be. It can be. It can be one of those things where you're like, oh, I hated that guy, but I actually loved him. You know what I mean? It was one of those things. Yep, I agree. We move on. Port scene number 2. Now, we're flying here, Will, because we have the arrivals, and now we're talking about, this is what ChatGPT said. And I'm just going to go with it because I kind of, again, I wanted to just sit back, enjoy a movie for once, and see what I can retain. Because a lot of my notes is just more for my retaining because I feel like I'm forgetting things that should be mentioned. But according to ChatGPT, it goes on to mention here that we get to the Baron's plan to steal from um, Greta Garbo's character. So we've already met Greta Garbo. She's in distress over, not wanting to go to the theater. Her managers lie to her and kind of set up how great it's going to be because she's this great, wonderful ballet dancer. When she gets back, he's already been in her room to steal the pearls that we mentioned earlier because he's got himself in some type of pickle where he owes money. I'm assuming he borrowed money from the wrong people and he has to borrow it or give it back, and he's just not found a way to do that yet. So that's scene number 2 of importance. Do you think there was anything before the rivals in here that is worth mentioning, or do you think ChatGPT is getting this right?
No, I mean, if it's simply based on plot, which is what I'm assuming ChatGTP is concerned with, then yes, it's probably on the right track here. But I do think there's a little bit, the chemistry between Joan Crawford and John Barrymore is like one of the best parts of the movie, right? Like the scene where he talks about dictation back to her, like, I'd like to give you a little dictation, like, but not in like a super creepy way, right? Because it's like there's some chemistry there and the way they're talking to each other. It's just, like that was a really good scene. So I think that's worth mentioning. Are we already past? Are we past the dinner scene already? Or is that right after this?
The dinner scene between who?
Well, the dancing scene, sorry. When they're at the bar and they end up dancing.
That we're not there yet. Nope, we're not there yet.
Okay.
So
well, then, yeah, that's the big one.
Yeah. So we're not there yet. Essentially, what's happening here in this scene is just Baron is now stuck in kind of these quarters, and everybody comes in, and she basically, this is where we get the infamous line, I just want to be alone. I want to be alone. And then everybody leaves. And she does kind of have this kind of outwardly speaking her internal thoughts of making Barrymore's character, the Baron in this case, Felix, uncomfortable because he feels that she's going to kill herself, right? She's alluding how she doesn't want to be around anymore. So, again, Will, you got a guy who has snuck in a room here to to steal some pearls and basically reveals himself as, hey, I'm in your room. The lady sees him. Why are you here? And within seconds saves it. Maybe not realistic, but not important in my eyes, to not a detriment to the movie, because it gets us right into, she's so low in life. She's looking for, a hand to reach out to her. She's found it in this thief, and right away they kind of, they fall in love in each other's eyes. So are you bothered by the unrealistic nature here?
No, because I think it's set up pretty well, right? Because on his way over to the room, he's climbing outside, right? He's scaling the building, and you get a pretty good shot of him up against the wall, and you see how far down it is. And then she's, after she kind of is giving her little speech about not wanting to be around anymore, she's walking towards the window. Yeah. So you can, there's some implications there that if he's not there, she's going to be, jumping out that window to the ground. And, I think it was, the setup that got us there worked really well. It was kind of a cool scene, almost like like a real action scene, right? And then him kind of jumping out and like trying to, like, he's a compassionate person. We see that in the way he interacts with the other characters too. So
for sure,
knowing that he could be saving a life, and someone being low enough to not scream when there's someone in their room that they don't know, like, I think it all ends up working out pretty well.
No, I really liked it, and I think just hearing you talk about it a little bit more makes me enjoy the scene even that much more, because it really changes the movie completely if he just hides behind that curtain, watches her jump, and like
shrugs his shoulders and got my pearls.
I mean, it's like, wow, you just watched someone commit suicide. I mean, you can't go be your charming self anymore. It really changes the whole landscape of the movie. So, since he reveals himself and we get, let me ask this. Is it important to the plot that, does he have to fall in love with her? Do they have to fall in love? Could you get to these same endings, without this plot line?
I don't think so. I think it's important because he if he doesn't fall in love, he's taking the pearls, right? And then the rest of the movie, it doesn't really matter. So the reason he doesn't take the pearls is because he falls in love with this woman, and the reason why he needs money after this is the reason that is he's driven into Praisling's room at the end of the film. So I think everything adds up here pretty well as far as the plot goes for John Barrymore's character, right?
Yes. Yep. No, I think you're right. I think you're right because it's not just it's more than just him being a compassionate person and saving someone who was getting ready to kill himself. He would have still walked out of even he might have saved her, but he would have walked out of the room with the pearls. It's the fact
Mm-hmm.
that he needed to give those pearls back to her because he's in love that now keeps him on his storyline to trying to figure out how he's going to get this money to where he ultimately ends up in another room with praising at the end of this movie, and we'll get there. So I think you're right. Okay. I'm glad we talked that out. The next scene is Chat GPT mentions that the Baron meets Greta Garbo. We just mentioned that. The next scene after that, though, is Otto Kringling, played by Lionel Barrymore. Any relation? I did not look that up. Is there any relation
Brothers.
between the two? They are brothers.
Yeah, this is the Barrymore dynasty.
That's
There's
right. We
a
mentioned
there's a
this.
third one.
That's
Can't-
right.
Esther or Essel. There's a third Barrymore, and John Barrymore is Drew Barrymore's grandpa.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Wow. That's right. I forgot about that. That's worth mentioning. Well, we get to the next scene here, which is the scene in which you were talking about, the dancing scene. So now we've got Kringline confronting his employer praising, okay? This is the next day now where Joan Crawford was looking forward to meeting up with Barrymore's character, the Baron. They're going to dance. She's all excited about it. Barrymore now has been changed because he is trying to figure out how he's going to get this money in order to meet the love of his life the next morning on the train so that they can, go off into their happiness together. While this is taking place, we kind of learn that Praising, even though his deal has fallen through, sort of, he's bluffed his way back into it. It might be still on the table. Now he's showing his hand that he is willing to commit adultery and cheat on his wife because he's going to kind of navigate his way with Joan Crawford's character and see if he can't get her to spend more time with him. So all of these characters now come to a kind of an important crossover here in this dance hall, and Krangling, basically a former, confronts his boss, Praising. He's a former lowly employee, confronts his cruel boss, Praising, who is staying at the hotel. This interaction exposes the power dynamics between the two of them. Essentially, what ends up happening is Praising cannot control Kringling anymore, and Baron really showcases his willingness to stand up against the authority here for the little man. And then Joan Crawford shows her side as well, constantly sticking up for that man, and not wanting to give Praising her attention. So this is the big scene in the movie. How did you like it? How did it fall out for you?
Yeah, I think it works really well. I think, the problem with this scene is it's the only really good scene that we get about class. Everything else kind of feels underdeveloped. And it doesn't have to be super obvious, right? When you're talking about class, to talk about class dynamics, you can kind of have some underpinnings. But here it feels underdeveloped, right? It doesn't feel like they gave much more thought to it. And I think that ends up hurting the movie. But as far as the scene goes, I thought it was really good. One thing we didn't mention is leading up to this scene, I think Praising says something like, he says something like, "What do I know about women? I've been married for 28 years." Like that scene was just hilarious because like it was just a funny line, but it also kind of tells you something that he's plotting something, right? He's got an idea in his head. So you see in the dance hall scene that he's trying to execute on that regardless of, who gets in the way.
Yeah, regardless who gets in the way. And, they do a really good scene in this, or a really good thing in the scene where they allow forget Baron's character for a second. Let's just take the three players in that scene where we've got Kraling, and you've got Praising, and then you've got Joan Crawford's character, right? Praising is he's showing his hand. He is not relenting on his power, his authority. He fires him, right? I forget the words he says. I denounce you or something. I forget what he says.
Yeah.
But
right.
but then Kringlin's character, I keep wanting to say Changelang. I don't know where that comes from, but Kringlin's character, he's doing his part really well. He's saying, no, you will not get to do that. I own me now. But at the same time, Joan Crawford, even though she's being empathetic, she's still not outright telling Praising he's being disgusting. Like, she's not clearly taking a side here and saying, hey, enough. Like, I don't want your dictation. I don't need your job that bad, right? Which is what you're kind of waiting for her to do as well, because the Baron, he's done it. You're waiting for her to do that, and this be that moment in the movie where everybody is on Kringling's side, and now Praising is the villain. But because Joan Crawford doesn't come on board here and doesn't fully do that, again, she's navigating all these things because she's got a 30,000 kind of foot view of this. I do think it impacts the way we, the viewer, see Praising. Where normally we would think this guy's a villain and we'd want nothing to do with him. He's got villainous things about him, but I genuinely, like, let me just put it in this simplest of terms. At the end of the movie, when he does what he does to the Baron's character, right? If he was a full-fledged villain, we would not want justice. We would not want that guy to have, a day out in the sun ever again. But because of the way it happens and who he kind of is, I feel like we kind of have empathy for that character where we're like, well, he went too far. He's going to get justice this way, but maybe he shouldn't have. You know what I mean? I really don't know what I'm asking you, but like, can you filter out anything there?
Well, I think you're right that Joan Crawford, I'd like the 30,000 foot view idea you kind of presented there, because that part is important to think about how she's clearly been in situations like this before where the boss is being, domineering, and she doesn't, necessarily agree, but she's trying to find a way through it so that she can stay on the boss's side at the same time as, the other person. Because if she hadn't, this situation, I feel like she would have either backed off and not said anything, or she would have overreacted and, been on the outs with Praising. So I think that's really important here, because what she's trying to accomplish is to essentially she's trying to navigate her way through. So I thought that was a really good point. As far as like Praising's villainy here, I do think like, this is coming from a guy in 2024, right, who thinks about class a lot. But I'm pretty. I think he's a nefarious character from the get go, but that's just my sentiment, right? I think there's a lot of people that would see him. We see this all the time where it's like internet reactions where someone dies and it's like, well, they deserved it. And it's like, no, I don't know if anybody deserves to die, right? So, I do think there is an opposite sentiment of mine that would say, like, Praising's in the right there. He shouldn't get in trouble for having killed someone in his room. So,
I guess what I was, I just felt like because of Crawford's navigation, it impacted how the audience viewed Praising, where I think if she in that moment draws a line in the sand, and again, it would change the movie a little bit, but like if she draws a line in the sand, then the audience would be fully on Baron Crawford and Kringling's side. Again, they are in that moment anyways, but if she does that, then it just validates how we're supposed to feel. And maybe by the end of it, maybe we wouldn't have that kind of opposing view of what happened, he would be a pure villain. I just thought it was interesting because I've never really looked at, I guess in that case, the navigation of Crawford, how it really impacted how we viewed another character. But it does happen all the time in these things. So,
Sure.
but
Yeah.
we move on. There's only, according to ChatGPT, there's only a few left here. So we move on to Preissing's downfall. Preissing, after failing in his business deal, grows violent and impulsively kills Baron. Now, this is ChatGPT not fully understanding, so I'm going to take it from here, but I do think it's the next plot point. So the next plot point in this movie essentially is where Preissing is now cut a deal with Crawford's character about how he's, 1,000 marks for her to go with him on this trip to be her stenographer there. And essentially, without telling us the deal, they've made a deal of services that will come along the way that will benefit him. And he says that when they get into the room, are you going to be kind to me? And she says yes. She says yes, even though we can kind of feel her in that room not really wanting to be, right? As they're getting ready to go into the bedroom, Preissing sees a shadowy figure moving around and knows that someone's in his room. As he walks into the room, we reveal that it's Baron character who is going to be stealing from him and hopefully getting away with it so he can pay his debt so that he can be on the train the next morning with Greta Garbo's character. And ultimately what ends up happening is Preissing fights for his money back. Now, I don't know about you, but there is a jump cut here because maybe they didn't get it filmed correctly. But did you actually see the Baron's character, Felix, strike with your actual eyes? Strike. I didn't either. Okay. Yeah. But Preissing alludes to it. He says, you hit me, or he hit me, and that's why I bashed his head in, basically. And he ends up killing Baron Felix's character. So let me ask this. Do you think they got to the editing floor and they're like, crap, we didn't capture the strike on camera? Like, what happened there? Why not just shoot it again? Was it was there something done on purpose there for us not to see? Yeah, just take his word for it. It's like, do you think he actually struck him?
Well, I can't say for certain because I don't know for certain, but it seems to me like there might be a little bit of truth is in the eye of the beholder situation here, right? Because he's the only other one in the room when it happens. So he can tell the story of what happens. It doesn't mean it's necessarily true. So whatever started the altercation doesn't necessarily matter if that's the story that Preissing's telling. So for us to not see it kind of lends maybe some of what the director's trying to do here is give a little bit of moral ambiguity to the Preissing character, right? Because we're not getting a full-fledged, denouncement of him earlier in the movie. We're not getting a full-fledged, in that scene, Joan Crawford's character saying no to the deal, right? So there's a little bit of complicity here. And when we get to this scene, there's even a little bit more. So I think maybe it could be said that the director's trying to leave a little bit on in the air here.
Okay, fair enough. You're right, because I just wanted to make sure that I saw the same thing you saw, because I was like, man, did he hit him? Did he not? Because if he didn't, and this guy just cold-blooded murdered this man, then, we're back to the villainous thing where I'm like, well, if they were going to make that decision, then I felt like Joan Crawford should have drew a line in the sand, and I felt like we should have hated this guy even more, throughout rather than playing nuance with it. You know what I mean? So because I kind of take him at his word, to be honest with you. I kind of I felt for the guy at the end and necessarily didn't want to kill him, but he definitely wanted to teach him a lesson for his trying to steal from him. So, don't get me wrong. I don't feel for him that much, but enough to be like, holy crap. I mean, you're beating someone. You kind of have an idea that you went too far. So, the final thing that we have, Will, is the fallout from all of this. Basically, Greta Garbo's character never truly learns that Baron died. Right. Unfortunately, I think the saddest part of this entire movie is Adolphus, the dog, now without his owner, right. Which there was something that bothered me about this movie.
Okay.
Can you tell me what the significance is about when Adolphus gets his big moment and he's being walked through the hotel? Why are they sweeping freaking trash into him literally as he's walking by? What was that about?
I don't know. Maybe the director didn't like small dogs, but that was all that was available.
Dude, it kind of pissed me off. I was like, hey, just
Yeah,
let this dog walk by himself. Why are we throwing
that's pretty
trash
rude.
at him?
Yeah. No, for sure.
Yeah. I'm glad you picked up on that, dog owners. And then after that, we essentially Garbo's character leaves unknowing. We know that that Praising gets arrested, and now he walks out. Barrymore's character is now dead, and then we get Joan Crawford and Kringling's character again. She's still navigating at this point,
Yeah.
and it does say something, even though we like her. She just witnessed this man die, and she's just like that on to the next. So again, it's a very interesting choice. And again, you don't have to leave these movies liking everybody. That's not the point of these movies. It's just saying these characters exist in society and we're just showcasing them to you. So
Yeah, so I think that's important, right? Because there is part of me that like wishes she hadn't have so quickly moved on, but at the same time, like how many days is this? Was it 2? So like, can you move on that quickly from someone you've known less than 48 hours? Probably, right? So,
probably.
I do think that one of the problems with the film is that it kind of takes for granted that her navigating this situation to try to get to the best place for her is her best option. So
Yes.
I hope they're not trying to make any sort of like moral claim about her, because that's, like I said earlier, like you can't put morals on top of something when it's literally just like survival, right? It's trying to find a little bit more to eat out in the world when you're kind of starving.
Yeah. And I think I'm guilty of maybe applying the moral question too much to these movies. But it's hard to detach that as humans because that's kind of what you're asking, right? You're like, okay, how am I? Every movie you watch, you're at, on some fundamental level, you're asking yourself, how do I feel about the character in which I'm watching,
Sure.
right? So
Yeah.
maybe I use it too much and I'm trying to find an answer of like, oh, are they good? Are they bad? What am I supposed to feel about them? When in reality, like her character exists. And the truth of the matter is I still like her and I kind of empathize with why she's doing it. So what does that say about me?
Well, the problem is, I think sometimes when you apply a moral question to a film like this, I'm not sure how well that question was considered by the creator, right? Because I think one of the problems we're butting up here against is that we are recognizing that her position is, she doesn't have a lot of choices. I don't know if the director is saying that in the film, though. I don't know if he's recognizing it himself, or if he's saying like this is how women act, right? Like I don't know how well considered this question is, which is why I think it's a flaw with the film, not necessarily a flaw with the character.
Okay, so taking what you just said, when you're telling a story, maybe he did, he wanted to tell an interesting story about class and, he dabbled in that. He told it through the perspective of a grand hotel, which is really fascinating because it's a great place to, where you can have people stationary in one building at all times. I never felt like I needed to step outside of that. Like taking what you just said, how important is it that a director considers that? I mean, is it okay? Is it okay to still, 4.25, 3.5, I would recommend this to someone that, had this type of interest. Is it that important? Or is it just the difference of 4.25 to a 5?
Right.
Okay.
I think that's the point, right? Like this movie is really good despite not having considered the question that I thought it was trying to very well.
Fair
So
enough.
it's the same as like, like I don't know, if you watch a comedy, sometimes comedy, like, can there be a 5-star comedy? Like, probably, but is it a 5-star film? I don't know, right? There's not many that have been able to take that step and get to an actual 5-star film, because sometimes the box you get put in is limiting to the overall structure, right? And it happens with action films. If you're just an action film, you're probably not a 5-star movie. You got to do something more than that. So here, that same, like, this has the potential to be 5 stars if they considered some of these things a little bit more thoroughly.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I think you're right. It's kind of like a double-edged sword, so to speak, right? Where, or maybe a catch-22. I'm not sure which way I'm going with this. I'm never good at applying the correct analogy, but it's kind of like, I'll let you do that when I get done with it. But essentially what's happening here is, because they're pigeonholed into the action film, right? They're already at a disadvantage of being a 5-star film. However, if they're clever enough to take that medium and tweak something or apply, some elements of different genres or whatever, like I would say a John Wick has this potential when you give it a great story, and then you take in the new technology and all these things kind of align, it can be a perfect film or a 5-star film. You know what I mean? I say that not ever seeing John Wick, but you get my point. When they play with, he starts at a disadvantage, but because they did it so well and they tweaked the right areas, it kind of became their advantage. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right. And if you're gonna win Best Picture, you open yourself up to heavier critique, right? Because someone's telling me this is the best film from night. Well, not just someone, but if the Academy is telling me this is the best film from that year, you're gonna get critiqued a little bit more.
Yeah. No, for sure. Totally agree. All right. Will, anything else from Grand Hotel with our first ensemble cast?
I don't think so. I think, are you going to do some nominations here?
Well, that's what I was going to go to next. So I was literally just going to ask you. I was just going
to say, as long as we hit that, because I think we've probably got a couple here.
So give me your list of what stood out to you, what didn't, who you want to nominate in what areas.
Yeah, so I think Joan Crawford as supporting actress belongs on the ballot here. I thought her performance was really, really well done, especially in the early, first act, where she's meeting the Baron, and her being enamored with someone works a lot better than Garbo's being enamored with someone, right?
Yes.
Yeah, there's definitely a clear separation there. Even though I still like what Garbo's going for the most part, Crawford's, she's a step above.
Hey, and she had a purpose in this film. Like, it's no Jean Harlow. Jean Harlow's in this movie. She gets 5 minutes of something, but she's on top of the marquee. So I say that, I don't want to, any Jean Harlow fans out there, I don't want to, turn you off, because I haven't seen enough of her movies yet, but for the 2 we've seen, not working so far. I agree with that. Did you have another one? Did you have a couple? Did you Baron Felix, or maybe even Otto Kringlein character? One of the Barrymores?
Both. So, both. I think the Barrymores both deserve a little love here. Probably Kringling is going to be in the supporting. I don't think he was quite in the lead enough. And then I would probably nominate John Barrymore as best actor.
Yeah, it's funny, because I think this is one of those films, because it is a big cast, and we talked about the front page and where do those guys fall, because they all kind of shine in their roles, but they weren't on screen long enough. I feel like all these characters are on screen long enough, maybe outside of Greta Garbo. I do find someone like appraising. I mean, he's nefarious and he's intolerable, but like he's doing his job the right way, right? You know what I mean? So like because we feel that way, he means the actor in this case, Wallace Beery, I thought he did a really good job. So like, I'm with you. I think we could nominate all of these people for the most part, at least those big 4: Lionel Barrymore, Wallace Beery, Joan Crawford, and John Barrymore. Just something that we haven't really touched on yet is Edward Goulding. I thought all the camera work, the decisions, I never felt like anything didn't make sense. I felt it flowed seamlessly, and that's hard to do when you're just stuck in one location. And if we're being honest, you've got the lobby, you've got the dance hall, and then everybody's room kind of looks the same, but like you don't know where you're at. So I think he is, even though they kind of get thrown into the category, I think he's worthy of being nominated. So.
Yeah, and there's some smart stuff, especially like you know with the room numbers, right? They make sure they know the room numbers up front when we're at the beginning of the movie, so that when they go to the rooms, we understand which room they're going to, and so on and so forth. So,
Yep. Yep. I had no doppelgangers here. I did think something that I want to do going forward, I think will be kind of fun. Another category that we can do is we'll call it a modern day recast. Okay. So think of like when we're doing this, think about, if we take a movie that has two main characters, who would be good in modern day to, play those two. Yeah, I didn't have any doppelgangers. I didn't have any hard hitting questions. There was a couple quotes that I thought, Otto Kringelein's character had that was really good. We shared those. So I enjoyed the movie. 3.5 for me. I won't budge. You've got to figure out if you're going 4, 5, or 4. You guys can follow him on his letterbox there, and we'll always put that on here for you. So, Will, we're next to Trouble in Paradise. Are you excited?
Yeah. I mean, we've got a few people we haven't seen a ton of yet. I can't remember. Have we seen Miriam Hopkins?
I don't know any of these names. Herbert Marshall, Kay Francis, Ertz Lubish. I don't know any of these names. So I think this might be some newbies for 1932.
Yeah, and we've got another love story here with a little. It might be kind of in the same line here. Grand Hotel. I think a thief and a pickpocket fall in love with while double crossing each other. So should be a little bit of Bonnie and Clyde. Maybe, I don't know. I'll have to see.
Yeah, a little cat and mouse. Who's going to get over on who until they ultimately say, "I tap you in." At least that's the way I think it's going to go. So,
Sure.
Will, we only have 3 movies left, 2 weeks left in 1932. We're flying as usual. So for all of you out there that have been paying attention, following along, we appreciate you. Continue to do so. Continue to reach out to us on Instagram, Letterboxd, and TikTok, and we'll see you next week.
All right. See ya.
Keep watching movies.